reverb's gone as well. What a win.
Good to go.
Awesome, thanks. Hi everyone, thanks for joining our second panel. I think we've got a high benchmark to live up to. So the focus of today's session is what are learners looking for out of micro-credentials?
Sorry, Cherie, if anyone there has got their window open at the back or another, they could just close that because I think we're getting an echo here. Okay, try now.
Okay, is that better?
Beautiful.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So there's no doubt that micro-credentials offer a lot of opportunity, and we've heard some awesome conversations and interest points so far. Alex, I'm not sure if you were in the last panel conversation, but there was actually a lot of interest on the potential for micro-credentials in the senior secondary space. So I think people would be interested in that one. Grant, sorry, my end again.
Yeah, guys, if you can just spell or mute each other, that would be great.
Okay, great. So one of the common conversations that we have at Open Learning with education partners is, there's obviously a lot of interest, a lot of the education providers looking to or have started building out micro-credentials play in a number of different subject areas, and often the conversation is about where do I start? Who are the actual learners looking for micro-credentials? What are they looking for? What skills, topics, types, etc. So I'm joined today by an experienced group of panelists who represent all different types and ages within the lifelong learning sphere as well. Rather than me doing an intro, I'm actually going to hand over now and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And Alex, I might kick off with yourself, please.
Sure, thanks, Cherie. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Alex Snow, Director of Employment and Enterprise Projects at the Foundation for Young Australians.
Andy?
Ko Andy Kilsby toku e noa ki te kure. Matatini ke Otago aho e mahi ana. Ko tako mahi ke whakahare mahi, namihi nui. Kia koutou, tēnā koutou e tēnei ahi. My name is Andy Kilsby. I bring you warm greetings from the bottom of the South Island in New Zealand at Otago Polytechnic. I have the pleasure of the Director of Employability with specific responsibility for micro-credentialing and our EduBits brand and platform.
David?
Hi everyone, I'm David Cummings. I'm the Head of Partnerships at Open Universities Australia, coming to you from the great liberated state of Victoria.
Awesome. And last but not least, Jo.
Hi, my name's Joann Pyne. I work at TAFE Queensland and I'm the Chief Academic Officer. One of the projects I've been leading is the development of micro-credentials at TAFE Queensland.
Awesome. So that actually segues nicely, Jo, and I might keep the focus on yourself. Are you able to give us a bit of an insight in terms of the types of micro-credentials that TAFE Queensland's been working on?
Yeah, look, primarily we've been working on a range of micro-credentials that have been identified by employers as being needed, things that aren't sitting in training packages at the moment. During the COVID lockdown, the Queensland government allowed us to offer 9 or 10 micro-credentials free to all Queenslanders, and we really targeted the opportunity for people to explore changes in the digital environment. So very short introductions into things like the concepts of big data, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and different technologies. We've also worked with the Queensland Government to offer micro-credentials to assist businesses and their staff to be safe during the COVID period. And we're working on a project with Alex that he will talk about, which is one of the really exciting things we're doing, looking at not just some of the technical issues, but some of the enterprise skills that are common across different vocational groups and how we can develop micro-credentials to support those.
Awesome, thanks. Alex, given your name was mentioned, do you want to explain a bit about your micro-credentialing endeavours?
Sure, thanks, Cherie. So at FYA, we've got a long history of working in education, primarily in senior secondary, and developing, forward-thinking and innovative resources for educators to deliver alongside curriculum, thinking about entrepreneurial skills and enterprise skills, given the need for students to have them to succeed in the future world of work. And so we started to think about what that could look like in the kind of early stages of post-secondary, and particularly testing that in vocational education and training environments. So we've been working for a couple of years down in the southwest of Victoria with a TAFE down there and a couple of industry providers to look at jobs growth, skills demand, and then mapping that back to current offerings in vocational education and training. So using big data to do that work, which is really exciting because it's at the forefront of using what's available and it often isn't used in public providers. And then based on that, running a co-design process with local industry, students, and people with lived experience to get a sense of what are the most in-demand micro-credentials that we could develop that also meet learners' needs. And so we've been doing that for a few years, and that's what led us to meet Joe and the team up in Queensland. And we're about halfway through that project now. We're focusing actually both projects on the health and community services sector, given the rapid growth of employment in those two areas, and also the need to support young people to transition into high growth industries, which they haven't previously thought about. And then COVID hit, and it became even more important for a whole host of reasons that everyone knows probably more than I need to talk about. The last thing I'll say is, and Joe picked up on it, is this idea of transferable skills. So we've been overlaying FIA's cluster research for both of these projects to think about the opportunity for micro-credentials to add value to a range of existing training products rather than just in one sphere. So that's a really kind of exciting point of difference for us.
Awesome, thanks. Angie, do you want to talk about your work next?
Yeah. Well, certainly at Otago Polytechnic, we started our micro-credentialing journey in 2016 also, and we took a fairly similar approach in terms of trying to do a scan into industry and to learner needs, and to try and gap fill learner requirements. We developed a philosophy where we wanted to commercialise this, and developed a separate brand, EduBits, and a development platform and team approach, as opposed to integrating that into core academic service. We also concentrated on something probably akin to the Deacon Co approach in terms of looking to utilise existing RPL methodologies to validate skill acquisition and the presence of skill. So what we were trying to do, I guess, was reach into industry, reach into the workplace, and provide a commercial option for firms and individuals to validate their skills. So to date, we've developed over 130 EduBits or micro-credentials. We've also, in the process of completing a strategic pivot, as you may be aware, in New Zealand, the vet sector is undergoing a significant transformation, and looking to align ourselves more to our learnings to date, and also what might future-proof the potential service moving forward. So certainly moving towards learning and earning, packaging these credentials into packages that we call training schemes or funded micro-credentials, and also looking for stackable opportunities into larger qualifications. So a bit of the whole gambit, really.
Awesome, thank you. And David?
Hey, so a little bit about OUA. We've existed now for about 27, 28 years, and we were set up in the time of the Keating government to look at widening participation of higher education. And as part of that, our original brief was to offer single credit-bearing subjects, and we've done that for, as I say, for 27 years. Now, through that process, a student can take this single subject and can build towards an award. And so typically a student will start doing a couple of subjects and then will lead to a bachelor's degree or even a postgraduate qualification. So there's obviously a strong link there between what we've done and I guess where the market is seeing itself in terms of micro-credentials. So over the last year, we've actually been conducting some evidence-based research with potential students, asking them really about, what would be their, what is their motivation to do short courses or micro-credentials. So we had a piece of research that we commissioned last year that was just delivered before the pandemic started. But then we've also done additional research, which we maybe talk about, which has been conducted through the pandemic period, looking at different cohorts of students and potential students in terms of their attitudes to study and what they want to study.
Do you want to, we might continue on with that though. Now, what are some of those insights that you gained through that process?
The initial research was really, really interesting. We identified two cohorts of students. Typically our students are mature age students. Very, very few of them are in that sort of 17 to 21-year-old cohort. We do have some, maybe 1 or 2%. So the majority of our students are over, are sort of between 25 and 45. So we identified those two cohorts, one of which were we identified as, I guess, having an undergraduate qualification and in the workplace, and those that had maybe school leaver certificates, but that's all. We looked at these two cohorts and started to examine the whole micro-credential field. Once you got over the explaining what a micro-credential was to these two cohorts of students, both were really, really enthusiastic about it. And in terms of those two cohorts, they had very different needs out of a micro-credential. If you were to look at the, I guess, the school leaver cohort, very, very apprehensive about, I guess, the frailty of their employment. It tended to be casualised, part-time, really looking to step into a career, and we're looking for micro-credentials or qualifications that could get them into that position. And so quite sort of skills-based, as opposed to the professional cohort, we call them that, who were looking for micro-credentials which would future-proof themselves in their employment. We had a director of marketing, for example, who was really interested in doing micro-credentials around, maybe it was social media or social marketing, so that they could understand what their team was doing and were able to direct and manage effectively.
Awesome, thanks. Alex, I'm going to head over to you now. When we caught up earlier this week, you used the term personas in what you're doing, and it's a piece where, for many of the education providers who are entering into micro-credentials or are already playing in that space, it is a different persona of learner that micro-credentials are developed for or appealing to in many instances. What are the key elements that you factored into the personas that you're developing?
Yeah, so the concept of a user persona is borrowed from the commercial world. Most people are probably familiar with human-centered design as a process for developing products, and the kind of rush to use that as an approach in the social sector and in education, and it's something that FIA's adopted. So we think about the target markets like what the others have spoken about in terms of who are going to be the people that use these micro-credentials, and then start to think about what are the kind of key characteristics of those people in terms of their needs and wants. And then we think about then developing personas in order to support acquisition and entry into those. An example in the Queensland project is we're working with 18 to 24-year-olds. They're Queensland residents. And then so underneath that, we've said, well, we want to test these with 4 cohorts. So the first one is people who are currently employed in industry. So they might be entry-level workers, but we want to think about that across 2 different employers. We then want to work with current TAFE students who might be towards the end of their study, doing a Cert 3 or Cert 4. And then we want to also think about young people who aren't currently employed or aren't currently in training. And once we've got those kind of key experiences or kind of baseline characteristics. We then start to think about what do they want to achieve in terms of doing the micro-credential? Do they want to do further study, or do they want to gain employment? How do they want to access it? Do they want to do it purely online, or is there a little bit of a blended model? Do they want to pay for it or not? Have they done previous study before? And so how likely are they to engage consistently and regularly? And then you can start to get a sense of how you might develop a delivery model, which the TAFE team have done a really fantastic job at developing thus far. And we're at the point now when we're going back to young people and saying, this is what we think we heard based on what you told us, and this is how we want to test it. Does that make sense to you? And then we finish it off with some flashy names and kind of colors just to, give it the design feel.
Awesome, thanks. Joe, with your micro-credentials that you've had running and, you launched earlier this year, have you found that they've, the persona of the learners that have signed up for them, have they aligned with who you thought would actually reach out for them, or is there some interesting insights there? I think you'd unmute, Joe.
The phrase of 2020. I think some of the micro-credentials that we've offered initially have really appealed to workers who are trying to maintain their skills or increase their skills during a period of quite tenuous employment. The work that we're doing with Alex is really a lot more focused towards, in regional Queensland, which I'm sure is similar in other parts of the country, we have, significant groups of unemployed young people and employers saying we can't get enough workers. So how do we bridge that gap? VET's very different to higher ed. We're not looking at delivering parts of a degree. What we're looking at is picking up things that aren't covered in training packages. And for us, we think that's very much, there are the technical skills that aren't covered in training packages. So for a commercial client, we're developing lots of very specific skills around robotics. But for the other area that we're looking at are those enterprise skills and those more generic skills that aren't often profiled high enough in a training package, and really being very specific. And I think a good example of that is the work we're doing around the digital skills for the caring industries. So we're talking to employers, exactly what systems do these students need to know? How do they need to access technology in your workplace, and really designing very specific items of knowledge around those. So it's really, I think, very different in VET, and we're really looking at being very responsive to employers primarily, and making sure that our graduates are getting the skills that they need to be effective in the workplace.
Yeah. Joe, you referenced an important point there about VET and training packages. I'm going to ask a question that might be a little bit pointed or controversial, but do you think micro-credentials offer the opportunity to increase the appeal or understanding of the opportunities that individual unit of competencies and skill sets offer to learners?
Look, one of the things we found during COVID with the digital programs is a lot of students came back to us saying, really enjoyed that study, I want to do more. What are the opportunities to go further? And they then transitioned into certificates or diploma programs. And I think that's the other thing that we've got to be really careful of. There's a lot of non-accredited training in VET. What we're really focusing on is making sure students understand what level of knowledge are they getting. How does this relate back to accredited training? Where does it intersect? And so employers can see, if somebody comes to them with a badge that says this, what skills are they actually bringing? I think for VET, we really need to be very careful of not having a huge raft of micro-credentials without any systems or processes that actually allow students and employers to understand what that learning actually is focused on, and what levels of attainment students are receiving from it.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. Andy, you referenced that you've built today 130 odd EduBits. You know, I'd love to say that all of them have been hugely successful. What have been some of the insights or, you know, learning points that you've found across those different programs?
I would really love to agree with you, Sherry, but unfortunately that's not been the case. So, you know, our philosophy probably has been a little bit of trying by doing. And to date, I think there's two elements. What is the value proposition of micro-credentialing? And it's been really interesting to hear the collective commentary around that. And what is the value that these micro-credentials offer for learners and for industry, and, you know, their recognition and their, I guess, their relevance. And what we've found is certainly when people are coming and sort of potentially considering micro-credentialing as a pathway, invariably those are individuals looking for upskill and reskill. So our approach to offer show us that you know it, validation of existing skill, potentially left learners saying, well, actually, I didn't want that, I wanted something else. So that's certainly why we're sort of pivoting towards packaging that back into you know, tangible learning opportunities that can be put into government funded packages as well. So there's an element of reflection around that. Certainly when it comes to I guess, again, reflecting the broader debate today, the recognition of and I love the term fluid skills, which I think it is actually far better than soft or employability skills, and actually providing a tacit representation of what they could be as well through evidence validation. And I guess from a academic quality perspective, exactly how far do you want to go down that path to recognise that and provide a tangible recognition to learners and organisations as well, is a really interesting point. You know, particularly when you're getting down to sub 5 credits, you're getting into a fairly tight marginal perspective. Particularly, you want to elicit a margin out of this, as we all do, to be sustainable practitioners. So from that space, there's lots of consideration. But certainly, it comes back to, you know, what are learners looking for? And I'm really interested to hear Alex and Joann's approach to actually, I think, take a far more evidence-based approach, utilising big data. I think that's to be commended, because some of our, you know, I guess, anecdotal analysis has proven to be fraught.
Awesome. I might hand over to Alex and Jo to respond to that.
Alex, I'll let you go first.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think, well, look, we're still at the start of the journey, but the way we approach it fundamentally is to be demand-led and supply sensitive. So we were big believers, and I think this has been validated in the swathe of recent reviews in Australia into the various types of education we have, that education has two purposes. One is to kind of build a confident, connected citizen, and the other is to support you to get work. And, you know, micro-credentials probably sit more in the to help you to get workspace. And so because of that, we want to be demand-led, and we use big data, but we absolutely have to be supply sensitive. So that's where we run deep co-design process with the range of different participants. And importantly for us, I forgot to mention last time, is that, you know, what's really exciting for this project with TAFE Queensland, but also quite challenging and daunting, is that we're tasked with building a skills framework for micro-credentials, for enterprise skills micro-credentials, so that what we're developing is not just a set of standalone products that have a shelf life, but actually something that can exist beyond the life of the pilot project, that can support, you know, a range of different activities for TAFE Queensland, a range of different industries and a range of different geographies, and that we're constantly checking in with learners to understand how they can best access and use these to meet that goal of, you know, getting and sustaining employment, particularly right now where young people across the world and in Australia have been absolutely decimated in terms of their employment opportunities.
I think it's interesting too that you know, just to reinforce what Alex is saying, that framework is absolutely critical for us. We need to provide our teachers with a framework to operate between, and a way of engaging with students and employers so they can understand what it is we're offering as well. Apart from the project that we're doing with FYA, a lot of what we've been developing is really being driven by industry. I mean, we're developing another micro-credential for you'll know now when you look at a housing plan, often companies will do fly-throughs and, you know, do a virtual building. Real estate agents and draftspeople don't have enough of people with those skills. There's not a training package that covers that. So that's an example of a credential we're building to fill that gap in our national framework. So, you know, it really is very much driven from an employer perspective to date in everything that we've done.
I think I agree with you, Joann. Where we've seen a lot of success here has been compliance-led initiatives, where legislation has then potentially identified an area of compliance within a job or a task, but there isn't actually a validation of that academically. So it's been an instant opportunity to actually develop a micro-credential to do that. And we've seen some good success in the dairy sector, particularly around the treatment of mastitis, and a partnership with a global supply company for that. But then that's the, you know, I think still going back to what's the demand for that, you know, learners still need to want to do this. And often with the informal training that exists around how people receive those skills, the extra step to collect evidence and submit that through some kind of portal is always the stumbling block in terms of learner engagement. So you've got to truly build that value. And where we've seen a little bit of success for that for us, or actually a reasonable amount, is in around lifting bicultural competency. So in New Zealand, clearly we have a relationship between iwi Māori and the state around a partnership. So we need to, where we've seen success is actually learners are, and particularly people like me who come from a non-Māori background, how do I upskill myself? How do I come across those challenges to be able to do, hopefully successfully, what I did at the start of this presentation and engage positively? As an employer, we also need to ensure our staff have the capability to do that, and we need to evidence that. So credentialed learning in that space actually ticks that multiple sort of lens of learner being interested, employer actually wanting to upskill, and also employer needing validation of that something different happened on Monday.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to throw a question out, and whoever would like to respond, please do so. How do you build awareness or trust in what micro-credentials are versus a formal qualification?
I think that...
Sorry, Joann, you go first.
I think that's why you're seeing so many of us place that emphasis on a framework and a structure, so that we can communicate and have that conversation with students, so they can see where it fits into the Australian qualifications framework. What does this actually mean in terms of the level of skill that I'm going to be taught? So that's been a particular conversation for us in the development of that framework. How do we make this crystal clear to students and employers when they're trying to make a decision about the value of the qualification that they're doing, or the credential that they're doing?
I agree. In reference back to a quality assurance framework and whatever is relevant to the jurisdiction that you reside. Not all of our exhibits are NZQA approved, for instance, but we certainly develop them utilising the same NZQA standards, moderation, those good things in terms of how we bake the cake. So communication of that to our is important.
I would just go David.
No, that's okay.
I'll just add what we've the echoes back.
Just an echo, guys. If you just make sure you're muted.
There we go. I'll just add quickly that for those who are calling in from Australia, we've utilised the Core Skills for Work framework, which dovetails quite nicely into the AQF and is vet focused, and so that's allowed us to use a common language with vocational providers and industry. And then secondly, we're starting to have a conversation around what quality assurance looks like for micro-credentials that are non-accredited. So how do we think about, the concept of developed in partnership with employers, which implies, some level of endorsement, and then how do you ensure a review process is built into that? And what we've heard back from industry is that taking them on the journey through a co-design process for design is much more therefore likely that they'll sign on for a review process down the track. And so it's building trust before you've even got to the place of taking it to market, so they're committed to that review and endorsement process later on.
Just reiterating what Alex had just said, when we asked, prospective students, what is it that the micro-credential would have to demonstrate? It was that credibility of recognised by industry and employers. That came through so strongly. So, that's one of the things that, is definitely there and is being demanded of by students. But also the transferability of the micro-credential itself, so that, it can be part of that Lego in the wall.
Awesome. I was just
and it's interesting, David, in terms of your research, that only 10% or 11% sort of market recognition of what a micro-credential is, and that to me demonstrates the challenge we all have in terms of building that story of validity and relevance.
Yeah, in the education sector, we do a really good job of coming up with things that resonate between us and maybe not to students or potential students out there.
Awesome. Thank you. With the programs that you're running, I guess one of the questions that tends to come up, is there more interest in traditional or, hard skills, technical skills, versus are you seeing more of a shift towards those fluid or transferable skills?
It's an interesting question. In our micro-credentials, that's certainly been what's popular, but we haven't been offering a lot of non-technical training. I think that students it's easier for them to see the value in those, but ironically, what employers are most wanting, some real development in those non-technical skills. So the challenge for us is, how do we engage students as part of their technical training to make sure we're also building those enterprise skills?
I think the demand has always been there, and I think now we're seeing, and COVID is a representation of dynamics that have been at play for some time. They've just been accelerated and put on the front page in a way. So I think you're now having a demand or a shift, it looked like, but I think it's always been there. Employers invariably want people to turn up, listen, and follow instruction as a minimum expectation, and the paper they then carry into the conversation should be reflective of what the person can do, but invariably it doesn't. So again, our approach has been sort of alongside. How can we make sense of the qualification in terms of the things that we know employers are saying they want on day one or within a short period of time, and sort of making sense of the qualification is sort of what we're doing, and that invariably leads to a different way in which we deliver education in the time that we do that with our macro qualifications.
Awesome, thank you. Angie, if I can just keep on with a question that came up. You made a comment earlier about not all of your EduBits or micro-credentials are going through the accreditation process through the NZQF. What is the determinant, or what are the factors that you're taking into consideration as to what gets accredited and what doesn't?
Well, it's a key structural element. Obviously, we were a part of the NZQA pilot for micro-credentialing in New Zealand in 2017, 2018. Where we were going with that initially, which is similar to the Deakin approach, albeit in a slightly more disaggregated way, was to develop recognitions of learning in effect, and assessments that could match a dual process, assessments that could validate real world evidence, but also could be attached into another program of learning. So, developing a more sustainable approach to assessment design. Where NZQA and our funding body in New Zealand, TEC, landed around approval criteria for micro-credentials is they had to be embodied within a program of learning, and naturally that approach didn't fit. So actually, the reason why a lot of our micro-credentials haven't gone to NZQA is because they don't meet an NZQA criteria of their definition of a micro-credential. Our view is that there has been a market for that. we have approved on the basis that Otago Polytechnic is a Tier 1 organisation, and we were able to develop assessments, and we've been able to generate fee-for-service interest in that. So it's a slightly more entrepreneurial approach, you could argue, but it's one where we've found that actually it's meeting learner demand, and also too, we could get to market far quicker than we're going through a regulatory process as well. So I think our land speed record for the development of a micro-credential has been about 36 hours, which I say to gather interest, but it's not the normal time frame. Naturally, the development time frame is always that classic interpretation between an academic construct and a subject matter expert's take on what is actually required for assessment, and that is always sort of here to here, depending on what start page they're actually landing on to start with, and whether there is a page. So instructional design is a key element or a key skill set towards achieving a repeated and replicable and scalable activity in that space.
Yeah, definitely agree.
I would argue, what value does the framework affiliation actually provide? You know, do learners actually in New Zealand or elsewhere, do they always look up their record of achievement to see what's there? Do they consult the qualifications framework before they determine what education they want to come up with or connect to? So I think as an assurance of quality, absolutely. But are there other ways that we could do that, which is faster and more flexible to meet the obvious needs of learners and employers?
Awesome. I'm going to throw out it's a question that Gordon has posted in the chat. And I know, Alex, you've responded to it, but he's, the topic is employability skills include job application skills. Does the panel agree?
I'm happy to just kind of elaborate on the response I gave. Sorry if I jumped the gun, Cherie, I got a bit excited.
No, go for it.
So just picking up on some of the comments before, particularly around the demand for what we call enterprise skills. Our research over the last 5 years has shown that the demand or the kind of, the increased hype around enterprise skills, 21st century skills, fluid skills, whatever you want to call them, has stemmed from employers starting to name that they want them more from their graduates. And so we saw in a 3-year period, for example, a 200% increase in the demand for digital literacy skills from employers, 100% increase in the demand for communication skills, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we wanted to do is think about, well, if there's an increase in enterprise skills, you still need technical skills, you still need foundational skills. Are there other skills that are starting to also become important that we don't often think about in the development of learning curriculum? And so the portfolio of skills that we put forward is foundational skills, you still need to be able to read, write, and do maths. Technical skills, if you're a hairdresser, you still need to be able to cut hair. There's enterprise skills, communication, problem solving, project management. Then there are career management skills. And so career management skills stem from the fact that some other research we did estimates that, and most people would know this, a young person is likely to have 18 jobs across 6 careers. And the average time that a young person spends in a job now is about 3 years. So radically different from our parents. And so as a result of that, you need to be able to be very good at applying for jobs, writing CVs, having a digital profile, engaging with digital technologies, et cetera, et cetera. But the 5th one that's come out, and we've been testing this with the TAFE project, is attributes or social skills, personal characteristics. So, with automation, taking over a lot of those mundane tasks that we used to do, the ability to engage with other people, so emotional intelligence, empathy, dealing with a person's needs, resilience. How do we start to think about ways to develop learning and teaching and assessment that can privilege people's already latent personal characteristics and attributes based on their cultural background, their values, and how can we also support those who might not have them to get up to speed so that they can work, particularly in growing industries like NDIS in Australia and aged care.
Awesome, thanks. I'm conscious of time because the next presentation starts at 1. If I can just do a whip around and ask for, final thoughts or insights as to what you think education providers should focus on in terms of learner needs.
I think that universities in particular need to get better at asking potential students what they want. And I don't think there is enough of that. So if there's a takeaway, that's my takeaway, because I think there's still a radical disjuncture between what universities
Awesome, thanks.
Anyone else?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think what they want, where they want, and how they want it. And a flexible approach.
Awesome. Joe or Alex?
Just on echo again, guys. If someone can just mute, make sure you.
Look, I think we have to focus on quality. You know, these credentials have to mean something. We've gone from we have a very structured range of qualifications. People need to be getting value for money, and not, you know, having lots of opportunities to do courses that don't actually deliver on what they're promising.
Definitely. Alex, any final thoughts?
I would just reiterate the point I made before. So demand-led and supply-sensitive. Make sure that it can lead to something meaningful from an employment perspective, but make sure, as Andy said, students are actually going to want to engage in it, and that they can engage in it in a way which meets their current life, because everyone's got lots going on. And ask them, run co-design processes, you know, think about the different participatory processes that are out there that you can learn from to engage with, you know, a range of stakeholders.
Yeah, we've got one last question that's come through from Fiona. What expectations do students have regarding the types of assessment tasks in their microcredential? Do they expect, seek out formative feedback? Does this differ from macro qualifications? I'm going to throw in there that, you know, open learning itself, where a social constructivist baseline or foundation to the what and how we do things, I do think it's an interesting question to raise, where quite often we look from a scalability perspective, what's an efficient or scalable assessment solution, but does it necessarily produce that evidence that industry and employers are looking for? So if there's any last comments before we move over to the next presentation.
I think, Cherie, that's that balance you need to take, you know, particularly too when you're dealing with small credit and therefore small revenue opportunity. You need to be careful with how you do that. But essentially, the answer to Fiona's question is it's what solves the problem. So if the type of evidence that's required to validate that a person can do a certain thing is this, then it needs to be this. If it's that, then it needs to be that. Yeah. And I think it's a flexible approach.
Awesome. Well, I'll wrap up now, but I'd like to really thank you all for your contribution to today's discussion and the questions that have been raised. I appreciate your time. For everyone that's currently sitting in this conversation, I'm going to stop the broadcast in a second. If you can head back to the main stage, Alan from Le Cordon Bleu is about to commence his presentation. Thanks again, everyone.